of the biggest misconceptions I noticed on Twitter when people were talking about the conversation from these 3 NASA scientists about the upcoming UAP study, which, by the way, is going to start in the fall and is going to be around a 9-month process, is that they were saying, oh, it's only allocated $100,000 in funds to do the research. And yes, that's a small amount of money, but the money that is going to be used for this is phase 1 of the objective. And it's really allotted to help NASA understand how to go about researching this enigma. Not the actual research itself, if that makes sense. But in the following clip, Gadi Schwartz asks this very question about how the money is going to be allotted. And this is a very thorough answer by a few of the scientists.
Our next question is from Gadi Schwartz with NBC. You may go ahead.
Hey there, just following up on that last question. So dovetailing, NASA has tens of thousands of hours of video of spacecraft, the International Space Station. It can be argued that NASA's got more access to public data looking up and looking down than any other public organization in the world. So are we to understand that you will be reviewing all that's accessible publicly within NASA, as well as other public videos or signals intelligence or whatever that may be, and putting it in a study for $100,000 or less?
Okay, I can answer that. This is Dan. This is no different to any scientific investigation that we would undertake. And the first step in any of those investigations is to figure out what data is at hand. That's step 1. This is all this study is doing, is to figure out what data one might use to interrogate better UAP. Okay, we're not actually going to be, certainly within that budget, analyzing those data directly. This is just step 1. What data are out there that could be brought to bear upon the problem?
All right, we'll move on to the next question. Oh, sorry, was there something more?
Yeah. Just to clarify, so what will that be? So there will be no determination on whether this is prosaic or something else. It'll just be basically what we've kind of seen from the DoD, which is we have 200 and some cases or such and such many cases of unexplained phenomena. Is that what the final product or the final first product may look like at the end of this study?
Why don't I take that one? My guess is to the final product, and frankly, I want to kick it over to Dave in just a sec here. But what I expect the final product to look like is to really address the questions that relate to what are the data we should be looking at, how should we doing that, are there data we should get that are not currently there. So it's much more kind of that the output from this particular study is not to sift through all the data and do all this research. It's to kind of make a proposal for a research program that we can then implement based on the inputs and the principles that are there. Dave, I'll kick it to you.
Yeah, I mean, just to reinforce what Thomas said, I think we will end up probably saying, look, here's the data we have. Usually when you do that, you then reach the conclusion that, well, the data we have is okay, but if only we took the data differently, observed from above and below a certain region of the sky at the same time, for example. I mean, without having done the analysis, I don't know what it'll look like. But ways of observing in the future that might give much more insight, ways of analysis in the future. Thomas mentioned AI and ML. We now have a lot of methodologies that are effective at finding anomalous events, finding fast-moving objects, finding objects that move anonymously. I'm imagining we will end up pointing it perhaps in future directions that NASA may want to consider future stuff. We will hopefully at least lay out some of a roadmap of how we might make progress in the future.
In the following clip, Thomas Zurbuchen goes into the kind of assets that could be brought to bear for the next phase of this scientific, systematic investigation into the great enigma of UAP. And I would also like to say that James Iandoli of Engaging the Phenomenon recently said something quite interesting. I'm sure he's just speculating, but he said something to the effect of NASA is trying to position themselves right now for the anticipated aftermath of upcoming UAP hearings. I'm not saying the scientists are necessarily trying to do that, but maybe there are higher ups in NASA that are potentially, if this is what's coming down the pipe, smart enough to understand that this is going to become a much bigger issue. And so they want to have themselves ready for when that occurs. And I've said before, and I will say it again, and I am putting a lot of my eggs, if not all of them, into this basket, and I'm okay with that. This all comes down to the hearings. The future hearings with expert witnesses from the Pentagon, pilots, radar operators, and so forth, is going to determine where this is all headed and what the truth of it is. And we can all speculate about how that's going to pan out. You already know where I think this is all headed based upon what I think the future hearings are going to reveal. But we're all going to find out. Let's play that clip.
Of course, what we're doing is with our 20-plus assets that are in space and an increasing number of commercial partners, we're looking at the Earth in new ways, and we're also looking the other way at the sky in new ways with assets that we have, but also with assets that the National Science Foundation and others are putting up, including commercial entities. And the question just really is, how do we use technologies such as AI and ML and other technologies that, by the way, are of high priority for us here to kind of really make progress in sifting through the data towards finding some of these interesting events that have the characteristics of UAP. So the data are here. Kind of our respective organizations have them and have done it. And the data are public.
So NASA has quite the array of equipment to utilize at their disposal to investigate anomalous objects in our atmosphere. And that brings me to a quote from Luis Elizondo. He gave this statement on Christina Gomez's YouTube channel in March of this year. And Tiny Klaus of Twitter helped me find this quote. The question from a viewer: if you were a civilian scientist and you could place a limited amount of sensors around the globe, where would you focus on placing them in order to capture data? And of course, he's referencing UAP data. Lou's answer. So I will share something with you, and I won't go into too much detail, and we're looking at that right now. You'd be surprised. It's a lot easier than you might think. You might not even need a whole bunch of sensors. You might need just one. And you might need to know where to put it and then how to corroborate that data with other data. I am going to do a very polite pass on that because my hope is that in the not too distant future, I can share the precise answers to that. And I think, and I don't use this term very often, but I think this is going to blow your mind. I think you guys are going to go, oh my God, it's been there all along. Now this brings me to a statement that Australian investigative journalist Rob Coulthart has made on multiple occasions. It could also be found, I believe, in his book In Plain Sight, which I haven't gotten around to yet. But he was recently on the Jimmy Church Show, and he says, I know for a fact that there is attempts to track and indeed bring down whatever these phenomena are. And they've been using tracking technology since at least the 1950s. They've known the signals that allow them to detect and predict where these things are going to be. And I'm told this has been happening. And then later it gets broached that UAP are being tracked going in and out of the water on the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Florida. And so apparently if who Ross Coulthart has been speaking to is giving him accurate information, then there are elements within the United States military intelligence apparatus that have actually been tracking UAP going in and out of the oceans. So why is this relevant? And why is this relevant to what I just shared with you with Elizondo's quote? And it's because a big part of the problem right now is that if UAP are indeed, at least some of them, stemming from non-human intelligence, and they spend a lot of time in our biosphere, then we cannot afford to reinvent the wheel. We have to rely on information that has already been gathered, because anything short of that is disrespectful to American taxpayer dollars. It's disrespectful to NASA. It's disrespectful to the scientific community. It's disrespectful to Americans. It's disrespectful to every human being on this globe. And so I recollect that during this NASA conversation, I don't remember exactly who said it, but they want this to be an investigation that does not rely on any classified information. However, there are people that they can talk to that do have clearances. That's what I recollect. But my point is that if we are truly not alone, and there's another intelligence or intelligences that are here, wherever their ultimate origin is, and there's a lot of talk about that. We really need to make that clear very soon. And so as these hearings progress, I think a clearer answer will emerge regarding that grand question, whether the US government truly has that kind of data or not. And in light of that, I think that if indeed the hearings go the direction I think they will, although I would never say that I know, and I could absolutely be wrong, then you can expect that this initial $100,000 that NASA is investing in a sort of preliminary study to figure out how to best approach this enigma is going to balloon to unfathomable levels if indeed it comes out that we are not alone and we are being engaged by non-human intelligence.
Thank you so much, Dan. And did you address what you wanted to off of the last person's question as well, or did you want to add in?
I'll just quickly say that one of the things you may have heard in the congressional hearings a few weeks ago was that there is a great deal of stigma associated with UAP among our naval aviators and aviation communities. One of the things that we tangentially hope to do as part of this study, simply by talking about it in the open, is to help to remove some of the stigma associated with it. And that will yield, obviously, increased access to data, more reports, more sightings, etc. So that's another thing that we're trying to accomplish with this.
So scientist Thomas Zurbuchen also chimed in on the importance of getting rid of the stigma that has been attached to this enigma for so very long. And I want to say that scientist Thomas Zurbuchen, Dan Evans, and Dave Spergel were all absolutely spectacular in this talk. I recollect one of them said that if they were to be honestly asked if there is non-human intelligence in our biosphere, they would just say, I don't know. That's what they could say as a scientist. I think that was Thomas Zurbuchen that said that. And one thing missing from this talk is you didn't hear the old, tired, skeptical mantras over and over and over again that many scientists sort of rely on when they go on to the media to talk about this enigma. Now that's starting to shift, but it was absolutely wonderful listening to these extremely bright and accomplished scientists talking about this enigma as a genuine scientific mystery that needs to get solved if at all possible. I enjoyed the entire talk. I think they ascertained and dealt with this issue perfectly. I can't imagine how they could have done better, frankly. They're objective scientists and they're just looking for the data. What more could you actually want than that? I can't even think of what more I could actually want than that. On June 13th, 2021, author David Bates wrote an article titled, "Who Called Sam Harris About UFOs?" And I've covered this before, but I'm just going to share with you 2 excerpts from his article to give you a very quick understanding of the scenario, and I'll also link to it in the description below. His article opens up with, "In recent weeks, the author and podcaster Sam Harris, in no fewer than 3 separate podcasts, has stated repeatedly and unambiguously that someone in or with connections to the U.S. government has personally reached out to him so that he can begin to wrap his brain around the fact that UFOs represent a non-human intelligence and think about how he might help prepare the public for that disclosure." Here's a second excerpt. "I've received some private outreach, and perhaps you have." He's speaking to Lex Friedman, I believe. "I know other people in our orbit have. People who are claiming that the government has known much more about UFOs than they have let on until now. And this conversation is actually about to become more prominent, and whoever is left standing when the music stops, it's not going to be a comfortable position to be in as a super rigorous scientific skeptic who's been saying there's no there for the last 75 years. So this quote I just shared with you did come from the Lex Friedman podcast on May 20th, 2021. And it gets you wondering if people in NASA are also starting to get a heads up about what's coming, assuming that it is. Just something to keep in mind as we move forward. So this is the series of tweets that I felt really necessary to share with you from cultural commentator, mathematician Eric Weinstein. He writes, and he's citing, or at least putting in his tweet, the press release from NASA. And this tweet is from, the press release where NASA says they're going to officially study UAP. And this tweet is from June 9th, 2022. "My physics colleagues generally still have yet to incorporate what is going on in the changing UAP picture. All of this lawyerly observations that currently cannot be completely explained, soft language in the absence of hard data is pretty confusing. Imagine if an MD said to you, 'For legal reasons, protecting our clinic, I can't share your data with you, but it is not impossible that a still small number of atypical cells may be non-locally replicating above baseline, as a way of letting you know you had metastasized tumor.'" He continues, "You might or might not even understand what a serious situation you are in. It all sounds so bloodless. If you did understand it, you would want to see the data. It is your data after all, data about you. That's where we are. No real data, bloodless language, few scientists. More or less, we are increasingly being told we have what appear to be large numbers of craft of unknown origin in our skies and seas, taking an unusual interest in world military activities so that our own government has asymmetrically good data it doesn't want to show us. Some portion of the U.S. government is saying we are repeatedly being visited by non-human technology. Some other portion of the government is saying, don't say that, either because it's a lie or they want it to stay hidden. The net effect, destruction of trust in government and science. It is now time to inform us all. It is either an elaborate U.S. government psyop hoax or something of incomparable significance. It's not swamp gas anymore. It's not Mylar balloons. And a few people desperate to get on television. But it is definitely time to end the soft language. It's big. I definitely agree with Eric Weinstein that it's time to stop with the soft language and get to the point of what's going on here. However, I do think it's going to be the UAP hearings that are going to facilitate that. What I think but don't know is the inevitable outcome. I think that a lot of the rumors and suspicions about what the government knows about UAP are going to end up being true, verifiably. Ultimately, it boils down to they knew we were not alone. They knew we were being engaged by this other intelligence or intelligences, and they invested in active campaigns to mislead the public because they didn't want to have to deal with the scenario for a multitude of reasons. You can't just cite one. Part of it is the nuclear connection, but there's other elements, and that's beyond the scope of this video. And I think that's a reality we're all going to have to contend with in the not too distant future. But that remains to be seen. I'm going to leave the video where it is now. We're already beyond the 20-minute mark.